and welcome to our People for Effective Government online event. We're very glad you could join us this evening. My name is Mark Kinney, and I'm the co-moderator tonight, and I'm a PEG board member. We also have Barb Kerr with us tonight. She hasn't been able to log on yet, but she'll join us in a bit. So Barb, join us when you can. So for those of you who don't know what PEG is a nonprofit, Spokane-based, nonpartisan coalition. Our mission is to support bipartisan approaches to governing, which are fiscally responsible, ensure an adequate social safety net, and promote a civil society. We've been holding in-person forums and online events for over 2 years. For those of you who are new to our organization and events, we look forward to having you with us at one of those in the future. We are committed to changing the current political climate in which the two major parties have become increasingly polarized. We are working to encourage sincere and civil debate about the challenges that face our nation and about effective solutions to those challenges by providing speakers with information and perspectives on a variety of relevant topics, just like tonight. We are a small grassroots organization. If you find these events helpful as you think about issues in government at the local, state, and federal level, please consider joining us at PEG or by making a financial donation to PEG. We are a 501c3 nonprofit relying on membership dues and donations to cover our costs. We board members are all dues-paying volunteers. If you're interested in learning more about PEG and possibly becoming a member, please visit our website at www.pegnow.org. You can join or donate at the Get Involved tab. So we ask that you would please help us continue to host these free public events. Now, as a reminder, the views presented by our guest speakers are their own. As a 501c3 nonprofit, PEG neither participates in political campaigns on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for public office, nor engages in political activity of any kind. Our topic tonight is affordable housing. Our panelists have worked on affordable housing issues in the Spokane area for over 2 decades through organizations such as Community Frameworks, the Greenstone Corporation, and Habitat for Humanity. And our panelists are Chris Venne. Wave to the folks, Chris. Okay. Chris has been involved in affordable housing for over 20 years. He's managed the home ownership program for Community Frameworks, which built and sold over 200 new homes to families not served by the commercial real estate market. He has also developed multifamily rental housing for low-income seniors, people with disabilities, and members of the Spokane area workforce. Jim Frank, say hi, Jim. Jim is founder of Greenstone Corporation and a regional home builder and developer of mixed-use communities. Greenstone has worked collaboratively with nonprofit home builders on affordable housing projects for over 25 years. Thanks for being with us, Jim.
Thank you.
And Michelle Girardot, smiling. Michelle serves as Chief Executive Officer of Habitat for Humanity, a nonprofit organization that helps families build and improve places to call home. Supporters of Habitat's efforts believe affordable housing plays a critical role in strong and stable communities. Habitat for Humanity has worked in the Spokane community for over 30 years and has provided home ownership opportunities to more than 320 families. Michelle says she was called to Habitat for Humanity after working in education and seeing the need for housing stability in the lives of children. Michelle, thank you for joining us this evening. So the ground rules for tonight's event. This will be a 1-hour moderated panel discussion with a 30-minute Q&A session immediately following. So for our panelists, we hope this will be a true discussion between the three of you. Experts, you all know each other, you've talked with each other. We hope this will just be a good discussion between the three of you about affordable housing issues. So feel free to ask questions of one another or to follow up on another panelist's comments. And Barb and I, when she gets here, will chime in with questions now and then. To our audience, we invite you to submit questions through the Q&A function on the website. We may present your question during the panel or afterwards in the Q&A. So with that, let's begin our presentation. Michelle, would you please start by telling us a little bit more about yourself and Habitat?
Absolutely. So absolutely blessed and privileged to work for an incredible organization that is dedicated to providing homeownership opportunities for low to moderate income families that are willing to participate in a partnership and to build and own their own homes. Habitat's been in the Spokane area for over 30 years, as you've mentioned, Mark, and I can't tell you that it's just a job. I mean, this is truly a lifestyle. To be working and walking alongside so many families that are just trying to have a slice of the American dream it's just an absolute privilege. And my job is to be as creative as possible in eliminating those barriers so families can have that slice of the American dream.
Michelle, tell us a little bit about how the pandemic has affected your operations. Anything good or negative or neutral happening to you?
Well, if anything, the pandemic has absolutely highlighted the need for a safe, decent, and affordable place to live. We can't tell our neighbors and our children and our teachers and our essential workers to stay home when there isn't a place to call home. We certainly can't demand that if home is an unhealthy place to be. Habitat often experiences, clients and families that are experiencing tremendous amounts of just horrendous situations. And so the idea of home isn't a reality for them. So the pandemic has absolutely highlighted that. The other piece of that pandemic has also highlighted how important it is for just the basic human necessities to exist for all of our neighbors in need. And outside of, a roof over our heads, it's, I think, also called to Habitat's constituents and our staff and our donors, how important that family unit really is. And as we've all gotten used to this new normal of, not having the same kinds of routines as we've always had, having that safe space to retreat to is so essential. So if anything, Mark, home is the prescription for the pandemic.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you. Jim, same question to you. Tell us a little bit about Greenstone Corporation, the work you've done, and what are you doing now?
Well, we've been in home building business for about 35 years in Eastern Washington and Northern Idaho. And so I've had a chance to work with nonprofit housing providers over that period of time. And we've seen how the market has changed, and we've seen, the problems of housing affordability, grow over, the last 20 or 30 years. And it's really been a slow walk to this, affordability problem, but it really is a crisis today. 10 years ago, our median home price was around $180,000. And today we're probably over $300,000 as a median home price. And so it's really become kind of a crisis problem in Spokane, and we've seen that grow. And the pandemic really has accelerated the problem. The pandemic's resulted, in the federal government response to it has been to lower interest rates. And so that lower interest rate has stimulated housing demand for people that do have resources. And then we're seeing a lot of in-migration into Spokane away from urban environments on the West Coast. And that was happening before the pandemic, but the pandemic has really accelerated that migration. both because jobs are, you don't have to, you can work from home. A lot of people are able to work from home, so that's been a driving force. And then a lot of it has been just people looking to get to a better quality of life and lower housing prices in Spokane, and then they can get in West Coast communities. So all of that is accelerating the problems and exacerbating the housing crisis in Spokane.
So I take it one of the nonprofits you've worked with might have been Community Frameworks? Is that true? Okay. Well, that's your cue, Chris. Tell us about yourself.
Well, I've been working for 20 years at Community Frameworks, a little bit in home ownership for 4 or 5 years, actually in a partnership with Greenstone in home ownership back in 2002 or 3, developing a collaborative project out in Spokane Valley. So that was, a pretty good success. And now we're trying to do another one in Airway Heights, also with Habitat. For the last probably 10 or 15 years, I've been working in multifamily housing, Community Frameworks develops multifamily projects for people who typically couldn't afford quality housing. And one of the things I would like to explore tonight, or to raise sort of consciousness about, we have probably spent the last 2 years sort of talking the homeless issue incessantly. It's been in the news, it's been in political campaigns, it's been all over, and it seems like everyone thinks that that's the beginning and ending of the housing problem, and it's only the leading edge. There are all kinds of serious issues beyond homelessness that are not getting the attention they need. I've done an awful lot of senior housing, and the whole issue of senior housing is, it's a tsunami that's heading for us, and we're totally unprepared for it. The population is growing almost exponentially, and almost nothing is being spent or done to provide housing for low-income seniors. The other area I think we have ignored is single wage earner families. Those families cannot afford rent. They have a hard time with home ownership. They're often credit challenged and can't get into home ownership situations. And both of those problems are just sitting there and no one's talking about it.
Very true. And I would think that in terms of the pandemic, people that have had job loss or maybe some reduction in wages might be even in a more precarious position.
No, absolutely. And efforts to help them are being complicated. Our work involves a lot of interaction with governmental agencies, and they're all in slow mode. Things that used to take a month to get done now are taking 2 months or 3 months to get done. Pricing is going crazy. Lumber pricing has gone through the roof. We're working on a 40-unit project kind of over on Cinto Avenue, and we just got a bid from a contractor who asked us to put $150,000 in a contingency for lumber price increases that could happen between now and when he signs a contract.
For the group, what's driving that increase in lumber? Jim or Michelle?
Well, it's a couple things. Once the pandemic hit, a lot of these agencies were shut down as people had to learn how to be safe to open up their factories again. But the other big piece, as we all know, August and September, that's no longer summer, that's fire season. And much of, the fires have hit the timberlands. Weyerhaeuser stated 2 weeks ago that the fires have hit their timberlands, and, all of those things affect it. Jim might be able to speak a little bit more to, what does it look like to, with the imports of lumber, but at least locally, it's certainly driving up the cost. I mean, we've seen just in the last couple of weeks, compared to April, nearly 80 to 120% increase in lumber.
And part of it is if you were to go back before the 2008 recession and look at the number of houses that we were building then, and then you look at the number of houses we're building today, it's really shrunk. And what's happened is that after the recession, the building industry shrank. A lot of subcontractors and material suppliers went out of business. Certainly the timber industry shrunk back, the number of sawmills and so forth shrunk. And so now that, the demand is back up for housing and housing is trying to catch back up, there's just there just isn't, based on the demand, there just isn't the supply there. And that's driving up the price, along with all the factors you've talked about, the fires, and there have been issues, with the tariffs between Canada and the United States and so forth, but a lot of complicated factors.
I would reckon that for you nonprofits, frameworks and habitat, that it's a huge issue with affordability of your homes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah. We have limited budgets. The other piece that's happened over time is funding streams have decreased. 20 years ago, HUD was a huge funder of affordable housing. You could fund, say, a senior housing project by just going to HUD, doing one funding application, and you took your chances, but maybe if you were good and you had a good project, you had maybe a better than 50% chance of getting that project funded, and you could go and do it. That money isn't around anymore. All of the funding streams, except for maybe one, the low-income housing tax credit, coming into affordable housing have decreased. And so now you have to do a project, you have to do what they call a capital stack. You have to get 6 different funding sources, and you have to spend hundreds of hours in an application process with each funder. And it can take 2 years to put together the money to do a project that 15 years ago you could do in 6 months. So what's happened over the process is affordable housing has become harder to do and more expensive than regular market housing.
Well, Chris, to piggyback off of that, so that 6th layer funding and financing for a project, that also trickles down to the consumer. So a low to moderate income family that's applying for home ownership, we're having to do the same thing. We're having to put together 6 different layers of financing just to make sure that home ownership can be affordable for that family, because of the increase in our very hot housing market, the increased costs of construction materials, and the dramatic decreases in public funding sources. I mean, we're all pinching our pennies, but it's all just compounding very, very, very dramatically. So it's taking even longer to not just build and finance the projects, but also to prepare and finance the families to have access to the American dream.
Just for the group, are you seeing any issues with I know, Michelle, you're up in Deer Park primarily right now with your construction, but are you finding any issues with finding developable land to build on, or that meets your price conditions? Or is that not
No? Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah.
Go ahead, Michelle.
That's a complicated question because it involves a lot of issues that relate to funders. Funders have a lot to say about where you put projects. And in a lot of cases, there are some negative impacts to that. And So it is often hard to find the right site, and the right
save that thought. I do have a question about that later. I think I know where you're going with that. Some barriers to getting to build where you want to build, I think is where you're going. Am I close on target? Okay, well, let's bring it back to the local area then. So who is most affected by the current affordable housing crisis in our area? Is it young families? Is it seniors on fixed incomes? Is it individuals? Is it all the above or someone else?
It's all the above.
It's everyone.
Yeah. Well, everyone who isn't wealthy. People who have money have options. People who don't have money don't have options.
Right, and I don't have the stats in front of me, but it's pretty well known that as a proportion of the state, we are not a high income area. So that would naturally lead to some issues with housing. I looked at the Spokane Trends newsletter that just came out, and it said that of Spokane County renters, approximately 25% pay more than 50% of their income for housing. Now, what's a recommended amount for your housing?
30.
So, yep, 30%. So
okay.
No one should pay more than between 30 and 33% of their gross income towards housing. And that should include utilities. It should include property taxes and interest and insurance if you're a homeowner. That's the sweet spot.
Yep.
But I don't really think that's very much of a reality for even more than that 25% rate that you're citing, Mark.
Yeah. I did a little research last couple of days and found that average rents in Spokane, about 1,026 average rent, and that breaks out a one bedroom about maybe $952, a two bedroom $1,153. And so I thought, well, what does that mean, $1,153 a month? And if you're meeting that 30% guideline, how much do you have to earn to be able to rent that two bedroom apartment? And the answer is $3,843 a month, or $46,120 a year to rent a simple two bedroom apartment. And if you have one wage earner, they need to be earning $22.17 an hour. And that's not Spokane. That's not the Spokane average, just to afford the average two bedroom apartment in Spokane.
At the 30% level?
Yes.
Okay, so that, go ahead.
If you were earning $30,000 a year, roughly $15 an hour, a wage that people want to get to, what you could afford is right around $750 a month, which is gets you into a class B or C or below apartment if it's available.
Explain that, please, class B or C.
Well, just, I'm saying less than
top quality.
Top quality. And there,
okay.
There's a fair amount of less than top quality places around, but some of them you don't want to stay in. You don't want to.
Well, and also factoring in, if you are looking where you can afford, as Chris cited, that may not be within an area that has easy access to transportation, that may not be easy access to the school that you want your children to go to, or even a grocery store. But also on top of that, it's not including how much you might pay in utilities. I mean, our Spokane winters can be pretty darn harsh. And, we've worked with, families that are spending upwards of $400 and trying to, squeak their way through, an Avista a CARES program where you can spread it out, but still, like that's a pretty hefty burden to place. And if we can even throw it further, I mean, as we're all commanded to stay home right now during this pandemic, you can all guarantee that our utilities are going to go up because we're home all the time. So it just further burdens a family. So what does, you know, a $725 2-bedroom apartment actually look like? It's much more than that.
Yeah. The older and sort of less maintained the building is, the more likely it's going to have high utility costs.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Jim, you have any thoughts?
I mean, I'd like to, I mean, I think we all recognize that there's a serious problem and it's multidimensional, but I think we need to really start to look at solutions, and the solutions are really urgent. So these aren't solutions that we can look and say, well, let's try to fix it in 3 years or 5 years. You know, we need to, there's things that we need to do right now. And it's such a complicated problem because there's probably 100 things that we need to do. And let me share, you know, just a couple of things, you know, just to show the range of the difficulties that we're facing in the market. You know, we're dealing with zoning laws that go back 50 years, and the basis of these zoning laws was really, you know, a lot of zoning laws are based in racial discrimination. The idea of single family zoning was that we're going to protect wealthy people, and we're going to, you know, try to protect those, you know, those single family neighborhoods from intrusion by other people. And so it's resulted in very restrictive development regulations on housing in most of our cities. And a lot of those regulations have been slow to correct themselves. So we don't have the option of building a wide variety of housing. So we're stuck with building single family houses, and it's expensive to build a detached single family home. You can, you know, if you were to be able to build townhouses, for example, there's efficiencies in townhouses. You get higher density, the land costs go down, the construction costs go down because the units are attached together. If you build condominiums, for example, small condominiums, that would provide an opportunity, but most of these building forms are not permitted. So we really need to focus on how do we increase our zoning capacity? How do we allow a wider range of housing to be built in a wider range of neighborhoods? And just a cost issue, you know, going to another area of, you know, we're doing a project, you know, in Airway Heights, trying to deal with affordable clientele that are living in dilapidated mobile homes in the crash zone of Fairchild Air Force Base.
Right.
And so we're trying to relocate that housing. But we're finding things like mitigation fees. The mitigation fees and transportation mitigation fees and water connection fees really have a bias against affordable housing. So we're building 800 square foot units, and they want to charge the same connection fee and the same traffic mitigation fee that a 5-bedroom, 2,000 square foot house pays. And so you really have a regulatory framework that has affordable housing subsidizing, you know, water and sewer systems and transportation systems. And these are just structural things that are built into the regulatory framework that need to change. They just need to be fair. They need to be equitable. And today they're not equitable. So we've talked a lot about this. In fact, I see Mike Padden in the audience, and Mike's really worked hard to help us try to make some changes in the laws related to condominium development at the state, because state regulations have made it impossible to build condominiums in the state of Washington. So Mike introduced a couple of bills. They weren't successful, but it's an effort that we need to continue because it's affordable condominiums are very often the very first step in home ownership because they can be done at the lowest cost. Small condominiums can be done at the lowest cost.
Where does the change need to begin? Does it need to begin at the local level, the state level, the national level?
Yes.
All of it.
Who would coordinate such a thing?
Well, I think everybody, there's probably a role for everyone to play. I think the first thing is that people need to understand the barriers that exist. And I don't think there's a good understanding to some of the things that, we face every day. A lot of people don't understand that. They don't understand that that we can't build condominiums because they look around them and they see condominiums and they think they're still possible to build when they're not. And
except at the very high end.
Yeah, except at the very high end. And they go to a project like Kendall Yards and they can see townhouses being built there, but they don't realize that after Kendall Yards was approved, the development regulations got changed and they prohibited, townhouses from being built in most zones. And so none of this makes any sense. But it's a series of barriers. And so everybody's got a little role to play here. There's things that can be done at the local level with development regulations, trying to increase, like I say, zoning capacity. And there's things that can be done at the state level, working on things like condominium reform, and also funding mechanisms. I think that we need to, we need to change the focus of public funding on for housing. We're dealing, like Chris mentioned, we're dealing with funding mechanisms that they just don't work anymore. And so we need to look for different ways. And the focus has been historically on financing construction costs. And the result of government financing construction costs is that we build these projects. And so we build these low-income housing projects. And then and these low-income housing projects end up in low-income neighborhoods because they're the only ones that will accept them. Mm-hmm. And so we end up with a system that puts poor people in poor neighborhoods. And the answer to poverty is integrated housing. It isn't segregated housing. And so we need to change that focus. I've talked with Chris and Michelle, at times about, looking at different approaches, like why don't we subsidize interest rates instead of subsidize construction? Because the difference between a 3.5% interest and 1% interest is the equivalent of 30% in construction costs. So you can reduce the price by 30% if you just reduce the interest rate. And then the money doesn't go away. If the government, they're spending all their money in the low-income housing tax credit program, extremely complex, costly program. Mm-hmm. And maybe they'd be better off, subsidizing the interest rate and allowing the private sector to build more units. And if you took a low interest rate, then you had to guarantee that your units were going to be affordable.
And I think the other piece of that too, Jim, that overall, like we're trying to speak to, is that housing isn't just a consumable that we throw away at some point. This is infrastructure that needs investment and thought and participation in to eliminate those barriers. And if we're ever going to, lift up a neighborhood to participate further in our, civic activity and our discussions, it's got to be integrated in a way that it's not just, big 7-Eleven Slurpee that we can throw away at some point. Housing has got to be looked at as, this long-term, broader it's not a consumable. It's a thing that everyone needs. Everyone needs a roof over their head.
Yeah. So I mean,
I'd like to also support what Jim said about the financing mechanisms. And it's something that we all deal with, and Michelle does, we do at Community Frameworks. The incredible complexity that's developed over 20 years in trying to get housing done and it's very counterproductive, it's very expensive. And it was all done, I think, by well-meaning people who just didn't really follow what the consequences of their actions were. And when they saw some consequence, what they did is say, well, that means we need another regulation. And, you know, I have tracked what it takes in time to do a fairly simple, say, 24-unit senior housing project, and just getting through the financing stage of it could take 2,000 to 3,000 staff hours. Mm-hmm. And that's nuts. It's absolutely crazy. And it adds a risk factor, it adds cost, it adds complexity to it. It means that it takes 3 years to do it when it should take a year to do it. Affordable housing should be easier to do.
So, Chris, how do you respond when our electeds say, hey, do you have a shovel-ready project? We need something to happen today. Like, how do we even respond to that kind of?
The only shovel-ready project you have is one you've already been working on for 2 years.
Exactly.
Chris, go ahead, Jim. Go ahead, Jim.
I mean, it just, I've seen the complexity that nonprofits have to deal with all of their funding. And even, you know, Chris's organization is going through a problem right now where on the Airway Heights project, where they made a small change in the ratio of multifamily and single family houses in their project. And then that's resulted in the state saying, well, we're going to withdraw your funding because you're not, you know, you're not doing exactly what you said on the first application. So now we have to hold you up. Yeah. I mean, it's just, you know, it's so complicated, and there has to be a refocus on how, I mean, public funding of affordable housing is a necessity, but we have to refocus on how that's provided, and it has to be simpler and more effective than what it is today.
Unfortunately, we have a small army of attorneys and bankers who make a lot of money from the way the things work now. And so there's always resistance because people are doing very well, prospering. A few people are prospering under the current system. And I think it's the way a lot parts of our economy work. And it's certainly true of housing, and they don't want to see change.
Well, and I think also, Chris, that there's a bunch of different kinds of housing that we need.
Yes, yes.
Like it isn't just, you know, home ownership. Yep. You know, we need to have an easier path for each one of these types of housing. So it's not so complicated and isn't placed in these totally bizarre buckets of, okay, you know, major homeless projects go in this bucket, then maybe rentals in this bucket, and then home ownership in this bucket. I mean, we need to be able to expand on all of these different kinds of housing sources, and to be able to partner that with a diverse set of house designs so we can have fully integrated.
And, you know, the nonprofit sector is not going to solve this problem.
No.
We need to incentivize the for-profit sector to build affordable housing. They're incentivized in the opposite direction now.
Absolutely.
So there's not enough public money to solve the problem. There isn't, there never will be. The private sector has to be a big player in it. And so that means the incentives have to work for them to do that.
Are you guys familiar with an organization called 10 Talents Ministry? Very small in Spokane. This friend of mine, Art. Are you familiar, Chris? They got investors together. They bought a rental property, and they are trying to provide affordable housing for folks. And as these people pay a reasonable rate, they pay the investors a small dividend, but then they try to buy another property and keep going. So that's an interesting thing. It is, and it's I think it's only been going on for about 5 years, but it's 10 Talents Ministry. If any of you are interested in looking at
I heard about it this last summer. It's a great concept. We need more.
Yeah.
We need more people acting like that and doing things like that.
I think they're looking for investors. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, and even, I think that's one place where, some affordable housing money, local housing money could go. Because if you took someone like that, for example, what if you said to them, if you find a house and you agree to keep it at an affordable, if you put a covenant on that property and agree to rent it at an affordable rate, then we'll give you $25,000 to help reduce the cost of that unit so that you agree to keep it at the affordable rate. Then instead of having to build an entire $250,000 unit, you maybe spend $25,000 or $50,000 to buy down the cost of an existing unit. And maybe your money goes further, and it's a simple process, and don't get involved in all the complications of financing and construction, but you support, it's one way of supporting the private sector. And
excellent.
And we need more money. And, one of the things that I've often wondered is, we pay the people that benefit from these rising housing prices. And so there are people that are benefiting. If you own a house, if you own an apartment, you're making huge windfall profits off of what's happening right now. So everybody that sells a house right now in the state of Washington pays an excise tax. And right now that excise tax, I'm not sure I know where it goes, but I think it just ends up in general fund budgets in cities. But why doesn't that excise tax go to affordable housing? Why don't we take that excise tax and maybe even increase the excise tax a little bit? Right now it's about, it varies now with recent changes in the law. It varies from about 1% to 3%. But if you have that transfer tax, you're placing a tax on people that have made a profit off of owning their home. And it allows those people to contribute to the need for affordable housing. And so I do think that we need to think about, using excise tax proceeds to support affordable housing. And that's a decision that could be made locally. And then I think local money doesn't have as many strings attached to it as state and federal money does. So I think that's one area that we could be effective in looking, how do we get a bit more money? And I know that, we're looking at a sales tax increase in the state of Washington to help afford affordable housing. And I agree with that. But I think we also need to find a way that the people that are making profits off of housing can also pay their fair share of what's happening.
Senator Patton, if you're still in the audience, I would invite you to chime in on the Q&A if you have any insight into where the excise tax does go and maybe options for redirecting it. We know no tax.
There is a little bit of the tax system going to affordable housing, and it's document recording fees. Now, right. For the last, I don't know, it's probably 10 years now, when you record documents at the county in real estate transactions, I believe you pay $100 for the first page that's recorded, and that money goes to affordable housing. And I think there's three. They initially authorized one. I think now there's three different document recording fees that are in place, and they're fairly flexible. One's directed to homeless and services, and the other ones are a little bit more flexible. The money's split between the county and the state. So Spokane County annually has, I don't know, it depends on the number of real estate transactions, but it could be, $500,000 to $1.5 million that does go into affordable housing related to real estate transactions. But that's kind of peanuts compared to
right. That isn't a lot of money.
Well, and Chris, there's a lot of stipulations of what kind of housing can be used with those dollars.
Right.
Do you
As
think
the county commissioners in Stevens County have recently found out?
Yes, but at least from Habitat's point of view, there aren't enough public dollars that we can actively participate in going after.
Yeah.
Home ownership has not been
Prioritized.
has not, I think, had enough of a participatory role in going after those public funding dollars. And as I hope you've all heard tonight, like the need for a diverse variety of housing designs and housing types in order to serve a vast, demographic. Everybody right now needs access to affordable housing. But if the funding is only going towards a certain kind of housing, then what? And if all of that funding is only going towards the very bottom end of the housing continuum, once those individuals and families are ready to move up, but there's nothing there, they stay in homeless shelters. Like they stay without that next step. And so if we are ever hoping to move our society along, that's not going to happen unless we have enough public interest in financing and funding to continue the continuum with, I would hope, the end goal being, home ownership, not Habitat home ownership, but home ownership free and clear.
Yeah.
Michelle, can you just give us a quick thumbnail of how the financing works for Habitat family and how they qualify?
Sure. So we partner with families that are earning between 25 and 80% of the area median income. They qualify based on really three criteria: their need. So if they're paying more than 30% of their monthly income towards housing, or if they're living in substandard housing, their ability to pay an affordable mortgage of no more than 30% of their income towards a mortgage payment, and their willingness to partner. The partnership criteria is interesting. We use this term called sweat equity, where families contribute 250 hours either volunteering in their community, in building their own home, and also becoming experts in becoming home buyers. So in return, we put together a financing package that at times has up to 7 layers of financing that includes not just the first mortgage, but also several layers of down payment assistance and subsidy in order for a family to qualify. As our housing market has increased and appraised values for homes in the Spokane area has also increased, we have been needing to also increase that down payment assistance subsidy to make sure that homeownership stays affordable. It's basically just like any other home loan. We do have deed restrictions on these homes. So what they put in, it'll be a 20 to 30 year mortgage term. And our hope is that they stay in their home for as long as they can through that mortgage term. And that they sell it to another family that is earning below 80% of the area median income. The key there, though, is that we also want to make sure that families earn equity. So a huge, I think, component of our social conversation in our country and in our world right now is making sure that our vulnerable populations are able to earn equity. And homeownership has been the catalyst to make that happen if you're able to achieve homeownership. So our goal is at the end of their partnership and their term with Habitat for Humanity, either they own their Habitat home free and clear, or they are able to sell it and earn that equity with a shared appreciation with Habitat Spokane. So we share in whatever proceeds on top of what it costs to build the home. So it's not a lottery ticket when they purchase the home, because the community and donors and churches have helped to fund the home and make it affordable.
I will just say from personal experience, having attended some of your home blessings, these are beautiful, well-built homes that you guys are building. So thank you. Let's take it back to the people in our community. Now, Chris, you talked about the need for a tsunami, I think you said, of senior housing need.
Yeah.
So that's where we're headed, but where are we now? Where's the need at now?
Well, we currently, 65 and older population in Spokane, the census data from 2019 says there are 76,680 senior households. That's 65 and older. And that's an increase of almost 50% in the last 10 years. And of those households, there are a huge number of, well, 58% of them are renter households of seniors. So it's a big, and of those renter households, 4,285 have an income of less than $20,000 a year. 6,305 have incomes of less than $30,000 a year. So there's a huge contingent of low-income seniors. You can imagine that, you know, how rent burdened they are. Housing rents for apartments in senior housing facilities that have amenities that appeal to that group, like transportation and meals and access to some services. They probably, for a 1 or 2 bedroom, are probably more like $1,300 to $1,500 a month.
Wow.
More expensive. And so there's a huge gap. There's only approximately 1,850 subsidized senior housing units in Spokane County. So, you know, you've got these 8,400, you know, families who are rent burdened, 1,850 units available. Since 2010, there's only been 85 new units built, which is an increase of 4.7%, where the population has increased 20 to 30%. And senior housing opportunities have been lost, like with the Cooper George downtown, that was a affordable senior housing project that had 140 units. It transitioned to market rate. The Academy.
Where did those people go? Do we know? Where did those people end up going?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Where did those people end up going, the residents?
I don't know. I know when they closed that the people I was working with who ran other senior projects were getting desperate calls saying, do you have vacancies? Then the Academy Apartments was 95 units that was lost. So of those 1,850, there's, you know, another almost 235 that went away. And there's no new units being funded. All the money is going to homeless. There have been rehabs of housing, senior housing projects. There have been several, but I don't think there have been, I couldn't find any really new projects since about 2009.
Is Spokane atypical for the group? Do we know about that, or is this a national issue?
I think it's a national issue.
National.
Yeah, well, and it's really exacerbated at the state level because they're giving a priority to funding homeless and nothing else.
Yeah. You can't get a housing project funded in Washington.
It's just policy coming down from the state level.
Okay.
I mean,
Jim,
I mean, we have some senior housing we have some market rate senior housing, and there's just a lot of seniors who are living on Social Security, which means they're living on, you know, $25,000 a year, essentially. And like Chris said, a lot of the seniors are in need of what I'll call a special housing product.
Yeah.
They need to be in a building where maybe, because, you know, loneliness and social support for seniors is an issue. And so they need to be in a supportive environment where they can meet other seniors and they can build a social network. And then they need some help with some services like, you know, housekeeping support and travel support and maybe meals and those kinds of things. And those services are expensive, and and there are just no new products coming online that support those people. One solution to this could be, you know, accessory dwelling units, so that we allow, you know, an accessory dwelling unit is essentially a granny flat that you would build on a single family home parcel. But at least in the city of Spokane, the regulations around granny flats or accessory dwelling units are so restrictive that virtually none are getting built. And, you know, those are the kind of barriers at the regulatory level that they just need to go away. And they need to encourage that kind of housing, because that is inexpensive and the supportive environment is there. So, you know, if you had an elderly person living in an accessory dwelling unit on your property, there's support that comes from being in something of a family environment. It's not maybe not a true family in that they're not a relative, but there is a supportive kind of environment there, and people do want to help other people, and it's all there, but we're prevented from building them, you know, and this is how complex this is. You know, there's people in wealthy neighborhoods are afraid that if you can have a granny flat, then the wrong kind of people are going to move into them. So they oppose them. And then once they oppose them, then all kinds of restrictions end up being placed on them, you know, in the guise of, quote, protecting the neighborhood. And then they become a non-viable option entirely. And there's just a history of that kind of thing happening. And more housing like ADUs, they need to be a matter of right. If you wanted to build an ADU in your backyard, a little granny flat over your garage or something, you should have a right to do that. And you shouldn't have to go through a special zoning process. You shouldn't have to go through a public hearing. You should just be able to go down and get a building permit and do it.
And I saw a draft of some proposed changes to the ADU ordinance, and it really was encouraging because they got rid of 60 or 70% of all of those regulations, at least in the proposal. Who knows whether it will pass? And you know that those wealthy neighborhoods are going to oppose it, but at least there's some thinking in a reasonable direction at the city.
Chris, can you restate what that draft proposal was? I missed that.
It's a draft that's been circulating. That's a rewrite of the accessory dwelling unit ordinance, and it radically eliminates a lot of the current restrictions.
Okay.
It just wipes out whole sections of restrictions. There's still some, but if it would pass, it would be a great move in a positive direction.
Well, and to be clear, like, that is such an easy step in the right direction. Yeah. It's such a small step in the right direction. I mean, everyone could just give themselves a round of applause and say, okay, well, we've moved in the right direction to make sure that ADUs can happen. But certainly that is not the only thing that needs to take place to make sure that affordable housing happens. But my goodness, if we could at least get ADUs squared away, at least we've got a little bit of momentum so we can move along and serve at least some people.
Yeah. And one of the things that I recall Jim and I talking about a lot, and he knows this better than me, is the city has all these planning documents that says we should be doing this, this, and this. And then they have a series of regulations that say you can't do that.
Correct.
So it's nuts. We say we have goals, and then we prevent ourselves from reaching the goals.
What city office would be a starting point for the coordination for that, or is it a political thing?
Yeah, I think more than anything, it's just bureaucracy and fear of change. You know, I do think that politically, in the mayor's office, I think politically on city council, there's a desire for change, but it doesn't translate down to concrete proposals from the staff. And so it's like Michelle says, something like the ADUs are so simple. I mean, this is so easy, and yet it's 2 or 3 years and nothing happens. You know, there are complex problems, you know, like, you know, allowing different kinds of housing types to be built in a single family zone, allowing townhouses and small multifamily. That is a much more complex issue. And if you can't solve ADUs, there's no hope that you're going to solve a problem like that.
True.
Exactly.
And Jim, just one thing I wanted to ask you earlier, can you just tell us a little bit about how Greenstone works with nonprofits?
I mean, in a lot of different ways. We try to look at what we do well and where we can support them and where they have a need. So sometimes we provide them financial assistance. So we sometimes provide technical assistance to them, and sometimes we're doing construction for them where we can do it at a lower cost than they can have it done in other ways. So we're doing quite a few different things.
You're adding value to projects that might not go forward if the costs were higher.
Absolutely. I can confirm that. Our Airway Heights project would not be where it is now if it weren't for Greenstone.
100% on that. I mean,
well, go ahead, Michelle, if you had something to add.
Oh, Greenstone is, we need to incentivize and we need to champion more developers like Greenstone. Because when we see these barriers, not just for our clients and our families that are trying to access affordable housing, but then affordable housing providers having those same barriers and trying to access the means to make it a reality. We only have so many cards in our hand, and when we're able to partner with an organization like Greenstone, it's a huge game changer. Tremendous game changer. I mean, it's we're talking about the bureaucracy just around ADUs. You know, when we're able to partner with a private entity to help eliminate those barriers so we can just get to what we're good at and serve people that are in desperate need, it's incredible.
Thank you, Jim. Barb, you had a question for the group. We touched on it a little bit earlier. I think Chris brought it up.
I have one. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. One of the questions I have, you were talking how it takes 2 years to get the paperwork done. So if this, what is it, House Bill 1590, which comes up with $5.8 million, how much of that money would go toward those 2 years of trying to pay people to go through the hoops with the paperwork? How much would it cost? You
know, it's hard. that money would not be likely spent on just funding a single project, or, you know, projects can cost, you know, from a few $1,000,000 to, you know, $20 million, say. Mm-hmm. So the $5.8 million is not going to fund, they'll probably spread it out. So it'll be some subsidy for probably a number of different projects, and it will be helpful, and it probably will speed up the process quite a bit. It may allow us to look at different populations. If that money can help subsidize a senior project or a project for working families, that might make those projects happen, you know, in an environment where they probably can't happen now, or very much more difficult. But I don't think it's going to change the fundamental sort of time frame of doing a project.
Let's go back to what the bill is and what it is supposed to provide for. Any of you?
It's a 0.1% addition to the retail sales tax that is allowed under state law now, and the city council can approve it for the city. The county has turned it down. The county said they thought it should happen by a vote of the people, and there wasn't time to do it under the deadline in the law, and so they voted against it.
So my understanding is then that it's state law that council levels or city levels can levy this tax for this specific purpose.
Yes.
Okay, so in the city of Spokane is considering that?
They are.
Yes.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Michelle.
I would advocate heavily to, if you are, let me back up. The reason why much of this came up is because affordable housing providers don't always have a Jim Frank to go to get the technical support and the savvy. So we have to figure out this kind of gap financing. And right now that doesn't exist. So 1590 is one way that all of us affordable housing providers can leverage the dollars that we've already raised and find that little gap to make sure that everything pencils out, to make sure that more affordable housing can take place. So I would say that if you want to see more affordable housing happen, if you want to see more families achieve home ownership, please reach out to your council member and ask them to consider it by the end of this year.
It has to be by October 1st, doesn't it?
So it has to be decided by the county if they are going to give it a thumbs up or thumbs down by the end of September 30th. And then the city has an opportunity to vote on it really at any time between now and the end of the year, January, February. There's been some talk that it may happen in October, it may be kicked down to the end of the year. But in my opinion, the longer that we wait, the less money we are able to truly create a fund for affordable housing that is on a local level, that isn't going to be dictated by a lot of the state regulations that we're having to, you know, kind of tooth and nail.
I have another question about 1590. It says it's to, you know, provide housing, help provide housing, but also the mental and behavioral services that people need. And that usually means that you have to either go see people, you have appointments, you have medication, you have all of these things that if you were Joe Public, it would cost a fortune because you would have to have insurance. And a lot of people who don't have much money don't have good insurance, or they have pre-existing conditions. So how does that work? How does that money help people?
Well, so on the surface, you know, it sounds, trust me, it sounds like it's not a lot of money, right? And the goal of it is not to solve all the problems. It's to help providers get across the finish line. So all of us providers have said, okay, we've raised all of the money we can. We've only got this much left to go to get across the finish line. So we can provide those kinds of services. That's what this money is supposed to be about. This 1590 money is not to solve all of the issues. It's to help the experts get across the finish line so they can look at their other funders and say, okay, we've got the rest of the money. We can go help these people.
Speaking of money, in either of the CARES Acts that were passed, did any of that money flow down to nonprofit housing or affordable housing?
A small amount. You know, I think a lot of money is being spent on rental assistance. Well, not a huge amount, but there's some rental assistance money, which, you know, that's another one of these pandemic issues in that people don't have money to pay their rent. The landlords can't foreclose on them. And so you got this double whammy that they're going to have. The landlords are small landlords are suffering because they can't make their mortgage payments.
Mm-hmm.
And the renters can't make their rent payments, but they're going to have them come due at some point down the road. And I mean, that's a huge collision course that's heading for us pretty soon.
Right. The legislation ran out. I understand there was an executive order to extend the forbearance, but at some point, there are going to be some people who can't afford to pay that back rent, and it could affect us in our own community.
Yeah, I heard a real interesting NPR story the other day about a woman in Chicago who had a rental and you know, how this was going to be her home and she was probably going to lose it. And at the same time, the renter was going to owe $20,000 for 8 months rent. And I mean, they both are going to lose. They're both going to have huge financial issues and, you know, and there's no easy solution.
I heard that same story. Barb, if you would help me, we have 12 questions in the Q&A. We've got about 18 minutes left for you folks. We want to end on time. Let me just see if I can find a good one here. So Mike Patton asks, and you have definitely talked about this through the evening, but what specific actions can be taken to bring housing costs down? I know that's a huge question. What can we do to bring housing costs down? To me, it's a supply and demand issue, maybe.
Well, I mean, I think it's a lot of these things that we've talked about. I mean, at the local level, we need to increase zoning capacity, you know, because if you can, like in the city of Spokane, the single family zone says that you can build 10 units an acre. That's what the density in that zone is. But the development regulations don't allow you to build 10 units an acre because you have to build detached single family homes on relatively large lots. So if you could build townhouses, if you could build small homes on small lots, then that would help reduce the cost of housing. It would reduce land costs and it would reduce construction costs. So that increased zoning capacity is one thing at the local level that would help. At the state level, there just needs to be a simplification of the financing mechanisms because so much of the state money is just wasted in bureaucracy and the nonprofit having to staff up to have experts to help them just go through the financing process. And like Michelle was saying, you know, 6 layers of financing to do one project. I mean, the complexity of all of this is very, very expensive. And so there's all of these layers, you know, and even like we were talking about on connection fees, just working to get equitable connection fees so that they're not being burdened with these, you know, excessive connection fees. You know, nonprofits want to be fair and pay their share, but why on earth would they be subsidizing expensive housing? And so that these are every step of the way, there's money to be saved.
We have a question from one of our participants. She talks about the fact that she is burdened with a tremendous amount of student debt and will probably never be able to qualify for a mortgage. So just people like her, she might be able to find a place to live that is whatever ratio of her income to rent. But there is a group of people out there that home ownership might be out of their reach permanently.
Yeah. As a society, we should be ashamed that we've allowed this to happen to young people. And there's plenty of blame to go around. You know, universities haven't worked hard to reduce their cost, and banks have, you know, looked at student loans as cash cows, and the whole system is broken.
I agree. And I'm rooting for those kids. I have 3 of them in that category that aren't necessarily student loan burdened, but, you know.
Well, there are some really great options if you are looking for home ownership, even just outside of Habitat. The Housing Finance Commission has increased their down payment assistance programs. You do have to attend a first-time home buyers class. So there are some programs out there that will help to, you know, chunk down the overall bitter pill of, you know, signing up for a mortgage. The trick, I think, is finding a home that is simple, decent, and affordable within your budget in a really hot market.
Very true, very true. Barb, did you see a question?
I did. This is, would the forum presenters be willing to list their recommendations and send it out so that citizens can lobby for these changes and reforms? We want to help.
Yes,
So
agreed.
would you do that? Would you tell us what to do and how to, and who to send it to? And we'll be the what is it? The sticky wheel or the sticky wicket or something? We'll make
squeaky wheel.
Yes.
By the way, this will be up on our website. This video will be up on our website within a week to 10 days. And we could probably, you know, attach a document to that with some of the issues that were highlighted for folks to kind of use as a guide, if you'd be willing to help us with that.
Sure.
A little follow-up. Okay. We had another question, and you've talked about it, all of you have, about how homelessness has become the focus for housing issues. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's because of the visibility of the homeless in the community? Is there other factors?
I think it's the high visibility.
The high visibility of the issue.
Yeah, I think, you know, if you've been to Seattle in the last year and you're, you know, driving down on the waterfront and, you know, and you just see those little tent cities everywhere. There's a little shelter from the rain and under freeway ramps and stuff. So, you know, it's hard for politicians, I think, to ignore. It's just right there in their face.
Well, I also think that, you know, and not to harp back on this continuum that needs the attention, but also, you know, we're kind of a society right now where we're like sharks. It's whatever's right in front of us. Yeah. And Jim and Chris have kind of heard me lamenting, I think, for the last, as long as this pandemic has been going, that if this is the problem now, we ain't seen nothing yet. Like, we absolutely need to have a serious call to action and moral discussion within ourselves to figure out where it is we need to get something moving forward. Because again, if we thought that, you know, the last few years of homelessness issues are anything, it's coming, you all. I mean, we're going to have a crisis even bigger than what we've experienced so far.
We have a tendency to react instead of be proactive on almost every issue, especially in the political realm. So I think you're on point there, Michelle. I would just point out that Senator Patton did answer the question. He said about 80% of the real estate excise tax goes directly into the general fund. leaving 20% to go elsewhere, presumably to housing issues. So Barb, did you have another question?
I did. Is it the city council that votes on the ADU ordinance? Is it just city council?
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay.
Within the city of Spokane, you
Yeah.
know, if it was Spokane Valley or the county, they'd have to do it, but it's unlikely that anyone other than the city of Spokane would do it immediately, I would think.
Okay.
Another question we got was about tiny houses.
Mhm.
Know there's been some efforts locally to start different tiny houses. I don't know a whole lot about them. Do you guys know anything about that concept?
Well, we have, Community Frameworks has 3 tiny house projects. One was completed in Olympia that was 30 units. It started as a tent camp run by the residents, and now it's a tiny house village. Again, still run by the residents, and we've got one under construction for vets in Ording, which is outside of Puyallup, and then one in Shelton, both under construction. They're, you know, they're reasonable, but they're not certainly not a panacea. You know, you got land costs, you got infrastructure costs, you
Upkeep.
current environment, they probably cost, tiny house costs as much as a full-size house ought to cost.
Okay. All right. Barb?
Is there any that I would like all of this information to be kind of constantly in front of people and efforts made to move for the public to get involved? It shouldn't be all on you. You folks you already have full-time jobs and then some. But you need people on point who just are broken records, carrying the message and fighting the good fight. And you have all these retired people now moving to Spokane who they can either, you know, complain about how everything's going to pieces, or they can do something about it. So what would you recommend? How do you get the public involved and focused?
Well, Barb, we used to brag often about how we'd have 10,000 volunteers annually swinging hammers and building homes. And this pandemic has certainly highlighted how we can't do that to the same extent in a really safe way. So for lack of better words, you just nailed it on the head. That we need to create more engagement opportunities for people to share these shared visions and hopes so we can be more transformative. So stay tuned. We are putting together a toolkit for volunteers to share with their neighbors and to share with their churches and their friends and their family in a social distanced way, so they can still have some kind of connection to what housing developers and Habitat are doing, while also being safe about it.
Excellent.
We should have done it probably 60, 90 days ago, but we're doing it now. So.
Excellent. That's great.
I've got a question for our developer, and this one comes from Ginny, our president, and it's a thought-provoking question, I think. There's going to be some excess commercial and retail property out there, don't you think? Maybe office space. Mm-hmm. And I've heard some rumblings about how that could be converted to residential. Have you thought about that as a possibility? Is that something that would exist locally?
I do think we have to look at that. And this is just another one of those restrictions that a lot of our commercial zones or light industrial zones don't allow residential uses in the zone. So you have to get a rezoning. In order to get a rezone, you have to get a comp plan change. That's a 2-year long process, and you have no guarantee of success. So I think that we need to, you know, one of the issues in terms of increasing our zoning capacity needs to be more mixed uses permitted in zones. So we need to allow housing really in almost every zone.
Yeah, and I think the driving force will be empty buildings and people, you know, crying for some type of relief.
Yeah, that's going to help. And to be honest, we probably have an excess of industrial zone land and an excess of office zone land and commercial land, because the opportunity to develop those projects is going to be diminished with a lot of the things that have been accelerated in the pandemic. Working from home, purchasing online, and so forth are reducing the demand for future development of that kind of property. So there's a lot of land that's zoned for it that needs to have a broader range. And to be honest, mixed use is, I think, the future of land development. And so we need to have a much broader range of mixed use permitted in our zone classifications.
So mixed use, one thing I might point out is the Matilda. Are you familiar with that? In Gonzaga. It's on Hamilton across from the college. It has retail on the bottom, a lot of nice retail, and then it has condos on top. Is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about mixed use in the sense of different types of structures?
Well, I mean, I'm talking about buildings like that, but I'm also talking about the ability to build housing in, for example, take East Sprague. Along East Sprague, the new area that's been redeveloped, a lot of the land along East Sprague is zoned commercial or zoned light industrial. And so residential is not permitted. And yet on a street like East Sprague, for that to be successful and for those businesses to be successful, they need people living there. And so we need to open up the opportunity to build housing there. And that opportunity doesn't exist on a lot of that land because of the zoning classification. So I think you need to open up those land use categories to residential development where they currently is not permitted. Interesting.
There is an example of that there, the Sprague Union Terrace,
yeah,
which I'm sure you're familiar with. It's a beautiful structure.
Yeah, and Frameworks has one South Medelia on Sprague as well. So certain part of it is corridors, centers and corridors zoning, and it is, but not all of it. And that only goes about a block deep. So there's large portions that could be better developed as residential that aren't, but some is.
Well, thanks, Chris. Good, Jim.
The historic McKinley School site off of East Sprague there is on property that's zoned industrial, and they don't have the ability to build residential, around that historic building. That it's just a shame, but that's kind of restrictions that exist.
So we're getting down to the end here. I just want to ask a couple of final questions. Michelle, how can we help, or how can our viewers help you at Habitat right now? I know you said there are a lot of restrictions now with the pandemic. I mean, one thing that's always a chronic need is money, but how can we interact with you to support what you're doing?
Yeah, so certainly donate if you are able. We are always looking for that gap financing to make sure that homeownership is affordable. Donate your home goods and your excess building materials. If you're doing a remodel at your house, if you're doing fall cleaning because you never got around to the spring cleaning, our Habitat store would be more than happy to come and pick up those items and sell them. All of the proceeds from our Habitat store goes directly into our home building activities. And then certainly prayer, we could always use prayer. And for the small numbers of volunteer activities that we have, please go to our website, habitat-spokane.org. We do need volunteers. We have very small caps for volunteer activity on our rehab acquisition project. So we're rehabbing a number of homes in the West Central neighborhood. So if you have a honey-do list that you've not gotten around to and you need some pointers, come see our guys in West Central. They'll teach you how to do it. Or if you want to learn some tricks of the trade at our new construction sites, primarily in Deer Park, North Spokane County. So we need volunteers, we need donated materials and home goods, and we need prayer, and we need monetary donations as well. So, and if you've got a great idea that you think that could support our efforts, you know, give me a call or shoot me an email. We can make something happen.
And Michelle, you have been in your new facility now for how many years?
Oh boy. So we have been in our new digs that are not so new anymore, 1805 East Trent, since 2015. So we just celebrated 5 years, and my goodness, that went fast.
Boy, does time fly. That is a great location, folks. If you've not been down there, it's easy to get into, easy to get out of. The loading dock is great if you want to drop off building materials. Highly recommend that you check them out. So Chris, how can we support the work that you were doing? And Jim, the same.
I would say, you know, pay attention to any proposals that come up for ways the city can simplify, you know, regulations that will help increase the housing supply, sort of pay attention to things that are happening at the state level and at the national level, and support it when you can. I would say support people in elected office who will understand housing needs and you know, be a representative of those needs in their respective government bodies.
Thanks, Chris. Jim, any final thoughts?
I mean, I think this is such a complicated problem that I think education is really important. Mm-hmm. And I think if people would just, you know, try to educate themselves, and maybe one of the things that we can do, along with passing on, you know, some ideas that we see for reform, would be to, you know, maybe pass on a reading list.
Yes, yes, very good, yes.
You know, just some information that, you know, you can start to inform yourself on these issues.
Well, we look forward to working with you on that as kind of an after action item. So with that, I would like to commend our panelists for a wonderful discussion this evening. Thank you so much. You were wonderful. We appreciate you being with us tonight, and we really appreciate the work you're doing in our community. So as I said earlier, the video from tonight's presentation will be posted on our website within 10 days or 2 weeks. We invite you to visit our website at www.pegnow.org, where you can find out more information about PEG. You can see previous videos from our forums. There are quite a few of them on there. We want to invite you to join us for our next forum on October 5th, which will feature a return from former U.S. Ambassador to the Middle East, Ryan Crocker, who makes his home in Spokane right now. The title of his talk is "The U.S. and the Middle East at the end of the first Trump administration, Chaos or Calculation." So if you were able to be at our first Ryan Crocker event, it was sold out. It was very well done. I think this one will be equally dynamic. So with that, thank you again to our speakers, and we wish you a good evening.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much, Mark.